Hi, everybody. Welcome to NewsNite for Friday, April 20th. Great to have you with us this week. This week's broadcast is all about money. Fairlawn decides who can ask for money and where. Some local schools decide how they're going to cut some money. And the city of Akron decides who's going to be billed money if you have a meth lab in your house. Those stories and more next on NewsNite. A lot to talk about, so let's meet our panel. Freelance journalist and contributor Jody Miller is here with us this week. Great to have Steve Hoffman here this week from the Akron Beacon-Journal. And always good to see Bob Dyer here this week as well from the Akron Beacon-Journal. And these guys, let me just tell you, you guys wanted to start the show yesterday. I think these topics are so good. Let's begin in Fairlawn, and they have passed new legislation they hope will take effect in a couple of weeks, looking at panhandlers. I think we've all seen a rise in the Montrose area of people asking for money. You know, what's going to happen here, and will this make any difference?
Well, what's going to happen is that panhandlers will now have to have a permit from the city of Fairlawn. They will have to register in order to stand panhandling on street corners or whatever, although part of the legislation is that they have to be, I think, 25 feet from an intersection. They'll have to register with their name, their address, indicate any criminal record. Mm-hmm. And according to Mayor Roth, it's not to outlaw panhandling in any way, shape, or form. It's just to ensure more safety and enforceability for the residents, because there are a lot of times when the panhandlers are standing there at a street corner and traffic is stopped and it backs up traffic. Mm-hmm. They have sometimes accosted people who are walking on the street, and it's just a way to regulate panhandling in the community.
Yeah, and there's language about aggressive behavior, blocking someone's pathway, that sort of thing, to go to Jody's point about aggressive behavior. So it won't be outlawed, but my guess is that it will diminish the number of panhandlers.
I don't think it's going to make much difference. Akron did the same thing. The problem is the courts have consistently held that it's freedom of speech, and you can only do so much to regulate it. So I don't think it's going to have a big impact. I mean, look at Akron. You got to register here, and there's still every intersection you get to, there are people with their hands out.
Well, but the interesting thing about this is that with the rise in the number of panhandlers on street corners, the public has been better educated in terms of what these people are. I mean, this is a job. This is in a lot of cases a scam.
They work shifts in Montrose.
Exactly.
I mean, they come in at
exactly.
certain times.
And I mean, they can make a living doing this kind of thing, and obviously it's tax-free money. Mm-hmm. And I think Fairlawn's point is just, you know, let's just try to make sure that it's done on an upscale type of basis.
Is it just cosmetic? Is it just to make people feel better that they're doing something?
Well, they're doing what they can, and they're just limited by the courts in terms of what they can do.
Yeah,
but I mean, the problem is
there's complaints too. I mean, there are complaints from citizens, and I mean, you know, the mayor, I think, made it clear, at least in our story, that he was at least in part responding to citizens.
Yeah, he's trying to do something.
Yeah,
there's only so much he can do.
And the point that I think a lot of public officials are trying to make is that if you feel sorry for somebody who's standing there with a sign who says, you know, unemployed, my name is Howard, I'm an unemployed father of two, you know, I need to support my kids, there are agencies out there that will, in fact, help people to support their children. You know, they don't have to stand on street corners and solicit donations from drivers.
The problem would go away if people quit giving them money. I mean, the problem is not enough people realize these people they've got a job standing there with their hand out. If you quit giving them money, they go away.
Or the problem could go away if let's say, the new Walmart store happens to move to Rothrock Road in Copley, and Copley, as a township, really can't regulate panhandlers unless there's a county regulation or a state regulation.
Well, I understand that actually Mayor Roth has a plan B, which is to erect barricades around panhandlers. But seriously, I mean, Cleveland has moved pretty aggressively to exactly what Bob's indicating, to educate people who work in downtown Cleveland. Don't give these people money. A lot of them use the money for drugs, and there are plenty of places for them to go. Akron, for whatever success it's had, when you register in Akron, you're supposed to be at least informed, as I understand it, about alternatives, social service agencies, and that sort of thing. I mean, I'm not sure how successful it's been. I think clearly the intent here is to erect, no pun intended, some kind of barricade, on the theory that not all of these panhandlers are going to go to the trouble of of registering.
The old joke that we write about is if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. If these guys, violate these terms, but there's no police officer on the corner to see it, hasn't really done any good.
No, but there is, as part of the legislation, I believe, enforcement policy in terms of if they are not registered, if they are panhandling, the police do in fact they do have the ability to charge them with a 4th-degree misdemeanor. Right. So I mean, they could be charged,
right, which isn't going to get them held in jail, and they're never going to pay the fine. They're just going to panhandle for it. I guess seeing that going forward, one of the things they're going to do is a background check. Akron has done background checks and only denied those who had previous violations for panhandling, convictions for it. But murderers, sex offenders, etc., can still get it. I understand the Fairlawn policy. That's right, Bob got one.
True story. I walked right in and got one. That tells you what kind of people can get a panhandling.
But if they won't deny someone who's a rapist, a murderer, a burglar from getting one, what good do the background checks do?
Absolutely. It all comes back to stop giving them money. Stop giving them money.
So where are the agencies? Where are these agencies that they can go to? Because obviously we can send them all to the Haven Arrest, but if nobody's going to really go pick them up, how are they going to get there? How are we going to connect those people that have these serious needs, who have real needs, with these agencies?
This is it's a classic case because you really can't. It's very difficult to force someone to go somewhere. I mean, absent like a court order declaring them insane or incompetent or whatever. I mean, but just to pick somebody up and force them to go into the Haven Arrest or anywhere else for that matter is hard to do. If you were to convince them to do so, there's nothing to stop them from just walking away. So it's a difficult situation. Obviously, it's bothersome to some people more than others. I mean, if you're used to being in a big city, you just walk by them. But in a city the size of Akron, certainly Fairlawn, you're not used to it. You're not used to being approached like that. So it's a little disconcerting. It certainly looks awful. I mean, in my opinion. I mean, I mean, if for your community. I mean, I don't think people are going to let's not move to Fairlawn, let's not buy that house in Fairlawn. But it just, to me, it looks kind of tawdry.
The issue I raise, and I've raised this with the Akron plan as well, is you give them an ID around their neck with a photo that says City of Akron or City of Fairlawn. Does it create a false sense of security in the people that they approach?
I think it can. Absolutely it can. But in the same sense, if part of the whole process is to educate, and by getting the news out there that the city is in fact going to be, making sure that these people apply for a permit and making sure that the public understands that there are alternatives. Hopefully the bottom line is, like Bob is saying, if people do not provide them with money, maybe it'll just go away.
It's just like the signs at the zoo that say don't feed the animals.
Well, yeah, that's unfortunately a pretty valid analogy.
All right. We have seen in Akron already there are now more people registered to panhandle than we have police officers on the department. That's true.
Oh.
I've been criticized for saying that, but it is true.
Literally true?
It is literally true.
Well, just so they don't form a union.
And we'll talk about it as the plan goes forward right here on NewsNite.
For more NewsNite content, including extended discussions, full interviews, and the chance to speak your mind about the issues, join us online at newsnight.net.
The common topic here on NewsNite is school funding. Who's paying for our kids' education, and how should it change? This week, a couple of local school districts in the suburbs, Barberton and Woodridge, both looking at serious cuts. Akron will be weighing cuts very, very soon here. In Barberton, we're talking about 28 teachers, talking about 4 teachers at Woodridge. It may not sound like a lot, but for school districts this size, this is going to hurt. Is any school district doing well right now with these finances?
Oh, they're all struggling. I mean, we've had obviously a very tough round of budgeting from Columbus, and people are feeling the effect. Part of this is sort of the Kasich administration's, I don't know what you want to call it, tough love. I mean, the governor's people really would like to see more consolidation and more cooperation among school districts. It's very difficult to do. They haven't really given the school districts a lot of tools to do that effectively, or much encouragement to do it, so they're trying to do it the hard way. Districts the size of Barberton, though, they're big enough that they can generate some economies of scale within their own districts. It's some of the smaller districts like the Woodridges that are I've said this a million times. I mean, most of they're in Cuyahoga Falls. I mean, so they just ought to go ahead and merge with Cuyahoga Falls, in my opinion. Now they'll call me and berate me again. But and the only way out of it in the short run is a tax hike, and that's still a dicey proposition.
Well, and the problem that I'm seeing from districts like Barberton and Woodridge and Coventry, and this is just Summit County, okay? We're not even talking about the 500 teachers that the Cleveland Cleveland is just going to face massive cuts. The problem that's developed now is that the budget has gotten tighter and tighter and tighter. Levies have failed continuously. So what's happening now is when you're talking about cutting teachers, you're talking about cuts that directly impact children in the classrooms. Because when you cut teachers, you're increasing your class sizes exponentially. You don't have the kind of individual attention that you would normally get from a teaching force that can be spread out among the pupils. And unfortunately, this is what the districts have to do. There are cases, obviously, and I think we'll find this true in Akron, where the number of cuts that have to be made will be ameliorated to some extent because of not layoffs, but retirements. So it won't necessarily be cutting teaching staff that just blanket cuts, but retirements will help. But nonetheless, what you're facing is less teachers in the classroom to educate kids, and that's a problem.
If you were going to go into, if your kids were going to study teaching right now, they wanted to be a teacher.
Not in Ohio.
Are these the bad signs, Bob?
The only thing worse would be studying to be a journalist at this point. The future doesn't look good.
You want to be math and science or special ed. Other than that, I hear it's pretty grim. The one thing I will add, I mean, this has been a constant subject, in school finance, but when you push these financial decisions down to the local level from the state level, make it the local property tax owners' responsibility. You pass the buck, so to speak, all the way down to the local level. It naturally exaggerates the disparities among districts. So you have wealthier districts that tend to have a higher percentage of households with school-age children. That's why people move to those communities. And they will support, more often than not, a school levy. Then, you go to the urban areas and some of the less affluent suburban areas, much harder sell, and it's sort of a downward, like Jody's saying, you have class sizes that don't really allow for individual instruction. You start lopping off special classes, AP classes, anything that's not, mandated by the state, goes. And, unfortunately, you get pay to play for athletics and other things, and that will drive, I think, drives people over the long run to go find a district that doesn't do that. So it's just not a very good situation. And I'm not saying that every ounce of achievement in a school is due to money, because there are a lot of other factors involved in educating children. But when you get to Jody's point, when you get to the point where you're whacking teachers, it's pretty hard to argue that's not going to have a pretty direct and immediate effect on your ability to educate children.
So what holds these school districts back from doing some consolidating, doing some cost sharing to keep these cuts out of the classroom? You mentioned Cuyahoga Falls and Woodridge. There's any number of suburbs that are right next to one another that could share resources. What holds them back from doing that?
They're afraid of,
people want to maintain their fiefdoms. People aren't going to voluntarily say, all right, we're going to let you absorb us in most cases.
It's local control. I want to be in charge. I want my kids to go to my community school, and I don't want anybody else telling me, from another district what to do. And that's what happens. Is that in the same sense they're not realizing, well, if that's the case, then you got to pay. It's going to cost you additional money because and we go back and we've talked about it ad nauseum on the program about this is a state where in order to have an educated workforce, you've got to have the kids educated in school. And there are so many times when we're hearing from employers that they need people who are prepared when they come out of high school or come out of college to jump into a job, a technical job, just a job where you can read and write and have the math skills. And we aren't turning out those kinds of pupils. And it all comes back to just not enough money to pay and have the resources to educate the public. It's a chicken and egg situation, and I don't see any end in sight.
Yeah, I think for a lot of smaller districts, certainly it's hard to expect the superintendent and the assistant superintendents and others to warmly embrace consolidation when it could be their own jobs that are at stake. And the other part of this is just blowback from the community. I mean, you got a lot of people. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, it's like, well, it may be mediocre, but it's our mediocre, by God. And we still got our high school football team, and it's really sad to me. Yeah, I mean, it's a wrong-headed pride.
That identity is a big part.
Yeah, it really is. And a lot of communities, there are a lot of communities out there for whom the school district is the center of the community. I mean, it really is the focal point of the town.
Well, and don't forget, I think it's upwards of 75% of the cost of a school district and the budgetary constraints of a school district are personnel. And it is salaries and it is benefits, and a lot of them have made cuts. A lot of teachers groups have taken pay freezes. They're contributing more to their health benefits, but I mean that is the biggest chunk of where the money for a school district goes, is to the personnel.
Well, I think some of them might be relying on retirements to help bail them out, but as we're seeing in the economy, there's a lot of people who wanted to retire who really can't just yet. It hasn't really fit into their plan, and we'll continue to watch what happens with these districts and the Akron district as they make some key decisions in these coming weeks. And we'll talk about it right here on NewsNight.
On NewsNight.net, we cover a broader range of topics than we can on the air in 27 minutes. Be part of the conversation on our Facebook page and at NewsNight.net.
Usually it's a good thing when your community leads the state in something, but when it comes to meth labs, it is a very bad thing for Summit County. This week, the City of Akron's council sat down and created some legislation trying to aim at who's going to pay to clean up these meth labs. This doesn't stop the meth labs, but does it go far enough to hold somebody accountable that we're not paying to clean these things up?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, they're trying to absorb the cost. The federal grants have dried up, and this can be, I gather, a fairly expensive proposition. For an initial violation, they can hit you for, I think it's up to $1,200. Mm-hmm. The other piece of this, though, that it's kind of a catch-22, is there really is no standard for cleaning up a meth house. There's nothing you can do as a property owner or landlord to prove that your property is safe. So once you're listed, and the Summit County Sheriff's Office has a website. Once you're listed, there's no way to get off the list. And the council members who worked on this, Gary Moneypenny among them, thought about trying to come up with some standard locally, but they decided they would pass a resolution as part of this package to get Columbus to act on this. And in this sense, they're right. There really needs to be a statewide standard for cleanup. For what's safe.
Nationally, it ranges from burning the house down to steam cleaning. I mean, and everything in between. There's just no recognized standard to make the thing safe again. The thing that strikes me about this is I would hazard a guess that most meth labs are renters. So if you own a property, you're going to get nailed with a $1,200 fine. Do you go in and check weekly? Do you check daily? Do you check every hour to make sure somebody's not brewing up meth in your house? I mean, to me, I'd have a hard time with that if I own rental properties.
Yeah.
I mean, the nice thing though also about this legislation is not only will people be property owners be fined like $1,200 for the cleanup, as we've talked about, and not only is there an impetus to make the state regulate how in fact remediation can take place, but what is so scary about this kind of epidemic is that meth labs can take place in the back of a trunk of a car. They can take place in a backpack. And one of the other pieces of legislation is a $10,000 fund of money that's going to helpfully educate people. Because what I think police are finding now is that, a 2-liter pop bottle is the vessel of choice to create meth. And you're finding these on the sides of roads, and these are toxic chemicals. So the education piece is to make with the public far more aware of the extraordinary incidence of meth labs, and that they don't have to be in a house. They can in fact be just on the side of the road.
Yeah, they call it shake and bake. These you can do in the backseat of a car. There is an appeals process of sorts built into this legislation. How exactly it will work, it wasn't spelled out completely, but you would go to the police department, to Bob's point, and you would say, hey, look, I've been out of town, I've been sick, I had no idea that this was going on in my property, or for someone who, debris is tossed onto their yard, and they get tagged as a meth property when all somebody did was throw one of these bottles out onto their lawn. So you could we'll see how it works, but I mean, in theory, you can go in and appeal to the police chief or his designee and say, hey, look, there's circumstances here. Can I get a break? And I can't believe that, and people also start calling their council members. I mean, my guess is that they're going to give people some latitude, at least here initially, give them the benefit of the doubt.
It's going to be like appealing this speed cameras in school zones with kangaroo court. I mean, we're going to have the same kind of thing?
Let's hope not. But again, it's not completely spelled out. I mean, it's as I read the legislation, the police chief would have fairly wide discretion about, what constitutes a break and what doesn't. Whether someone really was unable to monitor their property.
Talked to an Akron police officer this week. They went to a suspected meth house. They had to wait for the landlord to get there to let them in. Yet they could see people inside the house cooking meth, but they couldn't go into the landlord got there to let them in. And the people inside, knowing they were going to be arrested, still kept cooking for 30 to 45, didn't try to get rid of it or anything like that. And what it told me and what the officers told me is that the legislation isn't stopping the meth users at all because they are so highly addicted to this. And it's just such a complicated thing compared to like marijuana that we've seen for decades. So I don't know what can really be done education-wise to slow this down from those people that get hooked on it.
Well, and the thing that puzzles me is why Summit County? I mean, this is one of the top counties in the state that has meth labs. And what is it about Summit County that encourages this kind of thing?
We'd be good at something.
Are we just doing a better job of enforcing and finding them?
That may be. I mean, I've long suspected that. I don't know how you prove that. It's sort of like proving a negative. You have to go find other communities that it's like whatever. It's proving a negative. But I think that clearly the sheriff's office and the police department they're back on track with this. At least the Akron police are back on track to aggressively pursue this. So, it is like a lot of other things. The harder you look, the more you find. So whether we're like totally out of line with the norm, who knows?
One thing I'd like to see is a statewide registry, so you can go, if you're thinking about buying a property, you can go on. We do it in Summit County, I understand.
Yeah.
There should be a state law thing where if I'm going to buy Eric's house, I can check and see whether he was brewing up meth at some point, because that stuff is, you live in a place where they've been doing that, you got some serious long-term health problems.
Something like the Carfax, where you've always got the history of the place.
Well, for the renter or the buyer, too. I mean, the landlords are apparently are not totally opposed to this. So they kind of like it, I'm told, because it's a way for them to get their, at least the state piece of this, if the state does take action, there would be an avenue for them to get off the list, which they like. But then the flip side of that is the renter or the buyer. I mean, I would want to know, because this residue causes all kinds of respiratory problems, other problems. It's really nasty stuff, and a place could appear to be clean,
right,
and still be contaminated. So it's a difficult situation.
Well, as you talk about the fumes, another issue making headlines this week with fumes has to do with fracking and the EPA with new guidelines over how the emissions are going to be capped. But President Obama is being criticized for not making them go into effect soon enough. Here in Ohio, where fracking has taken off in the last 36 months, is any of this really going to make people feel better about the fracking that's going on across North and especially southeastern Ohio?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it may make people feel better, but I'm not sure that it's really going to solve the problem and the issue. I mean, what we need, and I know that the legislature is working on it, and I know the governor is working on it, we need better enforcement of what exactly needs to be done in order to ensure that this economic boom that has been promised for the state of Ohio does not take place without exponential long-range impacts environmentally. And as of yet, we still don't have that kind of regulation here in the state, and that's what's needed.
Yeah, the state's still moving. What the EPA, this announcement this week, it had to do with the air quality around these drilling rigs, which can be pretty nasty. It's benzene, which is a known carcinogen, some other things, and also things that cause global warming, gases that contribute to global warming. The technology is there to capture this. It's somewhat expensive. So I think the trade-off that the Obama administration was trying to reach, which is, to me, the secret to all of this, is, they gave, I believe, a 2.5-year window for compliance. The environmental groups want it right here, right now. The industry is saying, you don't want to choke this off. This is a huge source of eventually clean energy. Burning natural gas is not completely clean, but compared to coal and other stuff, it's
infinitely better than coal.
It's better, So, I think there's a lot of trade-offs here, but the idea of having a regulatory scheme that deals with all aspects of this, the emissions into the atmosphere, the drilling fluid that comes back up, which has chemicals in it, all of this stuff, the issue of injecting this fracking fluid back into the earth and causing earthquakes, and there's more and more documentation of this across the country, not just in the Youngstown area. So you need a package in place because, the sad thing is, there's only so much of this stuff underground. There's a lot of it.
There's a lot of it.
But when it's gone, do you really want to have the industry leave and then Ohio's left with a bunch of contaminated sites?
It's gone. They'll be missed just like when we're out of time, which we are. Bob, Steve, Jody, great to have you with us. Great to have you as well. We'll see you right here next Friday for NewsNite.